My name is Frédéric Simon. I'm the Energy and Environment Editor of Euractiv, and I will be your host for today's event, which is titled Navigating the Energy Transition, Implementing Clean Hydrogen Initiatives in the EU. Now, this event comes at a time when policymakers are busy adopting the market package, the proposed hydrogen and decarbonised gas market package, it's called. That was tabled almost 2 years ago now, and which is heading towards potentially a final agreement in the coming months. So how far have we actually gone in adopting those rules? What obstacles still need to be lifted in order to implement hydrogen projects in Europe? And how can regulation be adapted to make those projects actually happen on the ground? To debate these topics today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Maxim Peters to the far end from myself. He's from the port of Antwerp-Bruges. Next to him is Klaus-Dieter Burkhardt. He's former Deputy Director General at the European Commission's DG Energy and now adjunct professor at the Copenhagen School of Energy Infrastructure. Next to him is Maria Cecilia Salvadores. She's chair of the European Hydrogen Backbone, an initiative from more than 32 gas network operators in Europe. And finally, next to me is Mr. Jerzy Buzek, former Polish Prime Minister, now with the European Parliament's Industry Committee for the EPP Group. We had a last-minute cancellation, unfortunately, and this is Daria Nochevnik. She's special advisor on hydrogen for the COP28. She had to cancel at the last minute for health reasons. We hope she gets better soon, of course. So, thanks to all our panelists for joining today. We'll start with a short series of introductory statements, and then we'll move on to a panel discussion, which will also include questions from the audience. To put questions to the panelists, you need to use the Slido platform, so that applies if you're online, obviously, but also for those who want to put questions who are with us today in the room, please use the Slido platform for that. And you're actually seeing now on the screen the QR code to access the platform with the hashtag hydrogen initiatives to access the event. I think that's all for me when it comes to the introduction. So without further ado, let me turn to you, Maxim Peters, with this rather broad and introductory question about your perspective on the future hydrogen value chain in Europe. What are your expectations from policymakers in order to make these hydrogen projects actually happen?
First of all, thanks for inviting us at the table. At Port of Antwerp-Bruges, we're the largest chemical hub in Europe. We're also a major energy hub. 18% of the natural gas in Europe is actually coming through Bruges, Bruges, part of our port platform. So hydrogen is key to us. Getting that stable, secure, sustainable green energy supply and feedstock supply is key. Otherwise, industry will not be able to keep here. Maritime routes will vanish towards us. So we heavily invest in this hydrogen value chain. And actually, it's quite easy. What do you need? You need production, you need infrastructure, you need offtake. In the past years, we saw a lot of developments, a lot of announcements, but luckily we also see a lot of projects moving forward. We really see FIDs being taken, for instance, on the export project NEOM, a big one. Local production projects like Plug Power in Antwerp. We really see these projects moving forward on the production side. Of course, we need infrastructure, which is key. For us, ports infrastructure are the basics, otherwise we cannot thrive. We really see that, especially in Northwest Europe, moving forward. Let's hope in all of Europe, of course, we have this hydrogen backbone interconnected between all production and demand centers in Europe. In Belgium specifically, we have this plan by 2026 in operation in the port, connected to Germany by 2028 and neighboring countries. But on the demand side, we really see a bit of a problem or an issue. As we all know, the chemical sector is struggling today. We had the energy crisis, we had COVID crisis, messing up the logistical value chains. We have many crises impacting the chemical industry, and we really see this demand side struggling. Because of course, as we know, there is a cost gap to be bridged for the energy and feedstock supply, namely hydrogen and derivatives. So there we really see that not only the stick, but also the carrot should be there. Because of course we have these targets, this very much needed targets to reach climate neutrality, but we also need a carrot. Otherwise industry will leave Europe and just simply move elsewhere to produce. So on that level, we really hope to see Europe moving forward with initiatives like the Hydrogen Bank, but with appropriate funds to support on the CapEx and OpEx side these missing part, this key missing part of the value chain.
All right, thank you. Klaus-Dieter Burkhardt, your perspective and your thoughts as to what policymakers can do to get this market and this supply chain going.
Also from my side, first, thank you very much for having invited me here. A very interesting debate, I hope. I would like to make my opening statements more from the regulatory side, because when I look at the state of play of the trilogue discussions, what I can see, also what firms up as the final outcome of the regulatory framework, I can imagine that this regulatory framework should work quite well, but more in the light of an established hydrogen market where you have already mature supply, customer base, and also a well-developed infrastructure. I can really see that, but you have to imagine that we will have this mature market. But we will not have this mature market from day one, and Maxime has just pointed to one element, the demand has to be there, the customer side. And here I have my doubts whether what is currently developed as a regulatory framework has integrated the flexibility in the rules that is needed in order to support the kickoff of the hydrogen market. I will give you an example, what I mean here, because I do recognize, of course, that in the framework as it is on the table today and the trilogues, there are elements of flexibility that they say until 2030 you can do this or that. But in my view, this is not enough, because on the other side, the flexibility instruments that are built in are not, let's say, equally distributed. Because, and here comes my example, I give you the example of existing hydrogen operators that are currently there. The texts that are on the table for discussions foresee here, at least from the council side, foresee a blank check for these operators, because they can ask for a derogation of almost all regulatory rules that are applicable to everybody else. So they can continue without any time limit set in. They can continue business like as usual, not being bound by rules like third-party access, the unbundling rules, what have you. Mm-hmm. So there you give them all the flexibility that you want. On the other side, and here it's the Commission and the Parliament's text, is doing the other thing. It's building up roadblocks for the development of infrastructure by setting or abolishing cross-border tariffs. We will discuss it, so I will not come to this. But this is something on the other side which will hinder the fast development of a European hydrogen infrastructure. So, in my view, I would have three demands to the legislator or to the policymaker, as you have put it. The first is, what really matters at the beginning is that you have to help, or the regulatory framework has to help creating business cases. And in order to do that, the most important thing is that you need targeted instruments that reduce the cost difference between the clean and the fossil technologies. And here you have a whole bunch of instruments that you can imagine. You have direct subsidies, carbon contracts for difference. fiscal incentives, public guarantees, and also creating targets for the markets for hydrogen products. Here I also have my doubts. There are a lot of targets. And I just take one target. It's the target on hydrogen on the REPowerEU. 20 million tons, 10 millions domestically produced, 10 millions imported. No, but what does that mean? It means investments of 500 billion euros. It means 40 gigawatts of complementary new installed renewable electricity capacities. And it means final investment decisions in 2025. That is what is behind these targets. So I personally have my doubts that these targets, with what I have just said, what is needed in order to achieve those targets, can be achieved by 2030. So in my view, what would be needed, and this is only partly implemented, are legally binding targets with very, very concrete steps to reach these targets. Because targets are important, but they have to be binding, they have to bite, and they have to be achievable. And maybe a last point is what I can see is also in the discussions now, I still lack a bit the overarching principles. How do we want, with this new regulatory framework, achieve all three objectives of the European energy policy? That means sustainability, of course, but also affordability and security of supply. What I haven't seen yet is that this analysis, that all three objectives, which needs, in my view, to be pursued in parallel, are really reflected properly in what is currently discussed.
Okay, thanks. Bit of a reality check there regarding the targets. Let me turn to you, Maria Cecilia. So from your perspective, what do you think policymakers should be doing in order to get the supply chain started in Europe?
Thank you, Simon, and thank you very much for inviting European Hydrogen Backbone at this debate. We are now 33 TSOs across Europe with the recent incorporation of transit gas from Switzerland. Of these 33 TSOs, there are 24 TSOs from 24 member states, from UK, from Norway, from Ukraine as well. The European Hydrogen Initiative was set up by mid-2020 in order to collaborate to put forward a vision for the future pan-European hydrogen dedicated infrastructure. Since then, the TSOs that are members of EHB, we have made substantial investment and tangible progress in concrete projects across the 5 corridors we define as the key routes for the supply of hydrogen to meet those targets that my colleagues just mentioned. There are currently several projects at the FEED stage, at the front-end engineering design, which are expected to be operational in as early as 2 or 3 years from now if FID is taken positively fairly soon. Those projects will establish the first 3,000 kilometers of the future European transmission network, and there are in total 32 projects right now anticipating commissioning by 2030, which will account for around 20,000 kilometers of pipelines. So TSOs, the industry is making concrete actions and steps to enable the build-out of this hydrogen backbone at the European level, in accordance to the urgency of the REPowerEU, which I cannot agree more with Klaus Dieter. But we need indeed regulatory and financial support. First of all, the uptake of hydrogen is one of the biggest risks to the development of the European hydrogen backbone. As infrastructure, of course, should be planned in consideration of long-term future demand, the ramp in the transitional phase, the ramp up of the hydrogen market needs to be de-risked if we want to proceed ahead with our projects. There are also project implementation challenges. The timelines are crucial. It's an aspect that also policy can influence, clearly either accelerating or delaying the implementation of the projects. Here we have permitting issues, coordination between countries, and also coordination across different energy carriers is key. The availability of a skilled workforce is an issue as well. All these are factors that that policymakers can work to streamline the build-out of these infrastructures, or if not, will hinder its progress. But what is very key, and also following up was what Klaus-Dieter just mentioned, the de-risking of the projects, of the business case in the transitional phase is what is more urgent in our view. In the market ramp-up phase, market operators we will be unable to recap initial investments because the throughput of the pipes will be too low, so tariffs will be too high for customers, and users' willingness to pay will not cover the revenues we need, and someone has to provide for some warranty in order to cover this risk premium. So during this period, this early period, external financial support will play a crucial role, as I say, in the risking network investment. Over time, in a more mature hydrogen market, as throughput will increase, tariffs will be sufficient, but we need to provide for these early phases in order to go to the next phase of market maturity. So basically, there are many instruments. We will probably talk about all those, but the need is there.
Okay, thank you very much for giving us that overview from your perspective. And so, Mr. Jerzy Buzek, the policymaker's perspective now on what you think is needed to get this market started.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your question, but first of all, for the possibility to discuss some issues with all of you. I understand that all the remarks and questions given by the speakers, three of you, I addressed personally to me as a rapporteur. So I am really in a very difficult situation, how to answer your expectations and to assure you that I will do everything to make it possible. Well, generally speaking, it is a first question we should answer immediately. If it is really necessary to go to hydrogen, because electricity from renewables is our solution, main solution. So we should always say that very short answer should be to anybody that if we are serious about our goals on 2030, 2050, climate issue, of course, and if we would like to decarbonize some heavy industry sectors like steel or fertilizers or heavy transport, maritime, air transport, maybe also road transport, it's absolutely necessary to go towards hydrogen because electricity is not enough. We cannot produce fertilizers from electricity, unfortunately. And it's similarly in the case of coke, coking coke. If you want to replace coking coal as in producing in our steel industry, it's necessary to go maybe at the beginning to natural gas for some years, and then to hydrogen at the end. We cannot go with alone electricity in such a case. It's the same with air transport. It's a very important answer, because I am still questioned why you are going to hydrogen. why it is necessary. Electricity is enough, they are saying. Something very seriously. So what we need, I'm trying to listen to you first of all the stakeholders, if it is possible during our meeting to listen to you, not too much answer everything, but to listen, because it's my duty today. We need certainty, legal certainty, of course, incentives to create our infrastructure. So financing, and gas and hydrogen are interlinked, and we should be always serious about that, not to think in such a light way, because of course repurposing of gas infrastructure is our goal, very important, and we would like to see it in a wider perspective, not only gas and hydrogen. Hydrogen may be more important than gas, is another issue, but also electricity, because electrification is, of course, the first in our way to 2050 neutrality, and all the synergies between electricity, gas, and hydrogen are absolutely necessary. So we need, as some of you mentioned, we need, of course, regulated EU-wide hydrogen market. We need system integration, but also security of supply. Professor Borchardt, well, I don't know if you are more professor or director in DG Energy, which was a great work. Well, I thought for 15 years, but you explained me a few minutes ago that it was much more. So for me, you are still director in DG Energy, not so much scientist, but I admire your work today. So let me underline once again at the beginning, because I understand that we've got discussion in front of us. I would particularly like to learn stakeholders' views on creating a tariff model, for example, which is absolutely necessary if we want to create infrastructure. Some kind of tariffs are absolutely, and also cross-border tariffs. Hydrogen network is absolutely necessary. So I don't think that I can say anything more, because I don't know the result of trialogue at all.
We will end it there, but there will be more questions for you later on, I'm sure. Okay. Thank you very much. So let me start now and kick off the debate with a question that we'll put to all of you on the panel, is how you see, and I'll start with you, Maria Cecilia, how do you see the state of demand on the European hydrogen market looking forward to 2030, 2050, and how do you think regulators can help solve this chicken and egg problem between supply and demand? Because on the supply side, there's a tendency to say, well, let's look first how much demand there is. And on the demand side, there can be this tendency to say, well, let's look how we can get the hydrogen through, whether with pipelines or shipping or whatever.
The demand is there, but I agree that between the aspirational targets set by the REPowerEU plan and RED III binding targets for industry and transport, there's still a long way. There are no targets yet for the residential and commercial, but there is demand there. The demand, I fully agree, we are serious about our targets. Demand will be policy driven. What is important is that the industry in Europe is moving ahead, and there are plenty of projects for production. The infrastructure is a key enabler. Without the infrastructure, those projects are too risky. If you start developing at the scale we need hydrogen supply, you will need to channel, to reach your customers. And this is where the infrastructure can break that chicken and egg problem. But it's not without its own challenges, as I mentioned, because the demand initially will be low, and this ramp up is inevitable. It's not the first market that starts with low demand and then will increase over time. We think, according to our analysis, that we will reach full demand for hydrogen by 2050. So there will be development of new infrastructures in this decade and the next decade.
So it will be more of a staged development approach that you see materializing over the coming years.
I think that if we want to meet our climate neutrality targets, it has to be very rapid. Mm-hmm. But we need to be realistic as well.
Klaus-Dieter Burkhardt, your views about breaking this chicken and egg problem?
First of all, for me, it was never a chicken and egg problem, because for me it is clear that you have to pursue supply, demand, and the infrastructure at the same time. You cannot say, oh, the demand side has to wait until the infrastructure is there or enough supply, or the supply says, oh, I cannot sell it if I have not the infrastructure. Then you will be, I don't know, after 2050 before you have sorted that out. So you have to do it in a coordinated, parallel manner. And what you need for that, in my view, as I have said already, are clearly legally binding targets. There are few. I give you only one example. You have in the REFuel aviation regulation, because Professor Buzek mentioned aviation, there you have clear legally binding targets directly applicable on the demand for fuels of non-biological origin. And here it is, there's no difference in price between the so-called REFUNBOs and the conventional fuels. It's clear that such a legally binding target will create a demand, at least for this specific demand for aviation fuels. But then there are two other elements which I see that can also help to trigger the demand. One is another legally binding, on member states, legally binding target in the renewable directive that has been already adopted. And here you can see that there is the target of 42% of hydrogen has to be achieved in industry by 2030 and 65% by 2035. These are targets that will help to get to the demand that we need. And then there's also an interesting instrument that will help, especially to decarbonize industry, and that is the recent reform of the emission trading system combined with the carbon border adjustment mechanism, because both together will progressively bring the most important potential for industrial consumers of clean hydrogen in the EU, because within the ETS, it comes under the ETS, all what the industry is doing, and so the industry is obliged to price their carbon emissions into their costs. And the higher the ETS price goes, and they are losing because of the introduction of the carbon border adjustment mechanism, the free allowances progressively, these are real costs. So for them, there is a huge incentives in order to bring down these CO2 costs to change their technology to a more clean technologies. So for me, these are very important elements in order really to push in favor of a demand. When you are asking now, so how do I see the volumes? Here I have said already, I'm very, very critical to the targets that have been put out there. Personally,
they're not binding, actually.
No,
20 million.
These are political aspirations, and politicians always have to have aspirations. Yeah. But unfortunately, the business cannot work on the basis of aspirations from politicians. So there has to be something meat on the bones here. And what I can see, personally, what is achievable by 2030 is that we replace, by domestic production plus imports, the current use of grey hydrogen. We are using mainly as a feedstock 10 million tons per year of hydrogen today, grey hydrogen. And I believe with all these instruments that are there and good, it might be possible as a kickoff that we can replace these 10 million tons of grey hydrogen by clean hydrogen by 2030.
Okay, thanks. Maxim Peters, your perspective. So Klaus-Dieter Burkhardt outlined, all the demand pull, in a way, regulations that are being put in place at the European level. Do you believe that will kind of help, solve this chicken and egg problem?
At least it's one of the elements. Indeed, a very important one. Without targets, nothing would move forward. We're all convinced of that, because there is that cost gap. And in the end, it's the final product where there needs to be a willingness to pay. And we see today, some companies are moving forward a bit faster. They're the pioneers, let's say. They lead the way because they want to reduce the Scope 3 emissions. But that's willingness to pay, of course, of their end consumers that they need to be able to pay that premium for the green hydrogen. But most of the companies we see waiting till 2030, waiting till the targets kick in, hoping things will change, that Europe would flex a little bit. I'm not so sure that would happen. But we really see we have the pioneers and the ones waiting. And we really need to make sure that in the end, the companies are able to pay as well that premium. Because we always talk about willingness to pay. For me, it's more about the ability to pay. And we see that a lot of sectors are struggling, really struggling with paying a premium for their product because their consumer is not willing to pay a premium. Good example is the car sector. We really see products ending up in a car. There is really upstream a willingness to pay more for a green premium because they want to build a carbon neutral car. Other sectors, they really struggle, and therefore indeed a CBAM is important. They struggle with global competition, production, for instance in China, India, who produce much cheaper with less legislation burdening them. So we really need this protection of Europe as well with CBAM, of course within reason, to make sure that our industry can keep producing in this country, in this region.
Mr. Bruzek, maybe a comment on what's been said so far, or shall we reserve that for later?
No, I'm ready. All the time I'm ready to answer.
Okay.
Or waiting for next questions.
You're taking stock of all the comments.
Well, I've got, you see, a lot of papers.
I see.
Because, writing everything what you are saying is very important. I will use it in negotiations, in trialogue. All your arguments you should. But I would like to say a few words, if I may.
Go ahead.
Because it was infrastructure, first of all. And an incredible question, very important. What should be first? Supply, demand, or infrastructure? Of course, Professor Burkhardt answered absolutely three of them together, because somebody says, we don't have any demand because we don't see any supply. And supply is saying we don't need to produce or generate hydrogen because there is no demand. On the other hand, if we want to have supply and demand, it's absolutely necessary to have infrastructure. So I'm addressing once again retrofitting perspective in the future, which is also very important, at least in the long distance, because I understand that in distribution system it could be some other question. If we want to replace gas infrastructure to hydrogen infrastructure, is a very specific question in this case. I hope that the member states' proposal to establish cross-border tariffs could resonate well with stakeholders. I'm not sure of that, but I know that is a proposal of member states. Is very important for me. And I understand that we should do everything, that some major barriers to the development of hydrogen economy must be urgently addressed by us policymakers, and maybe in trialogue, if it is possible, immediately to address it. Another issue is Net Zero Industry Act, which we should take into account, because it's a very good answer, excellent answer to Inflation Reduction Act in the United States. We've got even more money than $369 billion in our both budgets of the European Union, but we don't see them very well. So Net Zero Industry Act maybe could help us also from the point of view of new technologies, because we've got also very important regulation on new technologies in the EU. And I would like to underline one thing which is important in European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen speech in the European Parliament, State of the Union 2023. Well, I must tell you, energy sector was named as the most important sector for next year. 4 times in 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, in the 4 speeches, energy sector was the first one. Now, it was not mentioned in such a way, because we decided on all the necessary directives, regulations to achieve our 2030 goal, Fit for 55. All of them are working. So it's okay. Let us stop it. Let us say, now we need healthy industry, competitiveness of our industry, and of course without energy sector, well organized, it is impossible at all. So everywhere, even saying about agriculture and security of food supply, we forgot about something like that. Security of energy supply, we understand very well. But what about food? Well, it is a question. We are in state of war, as a matter of fact, on our continent. So it's a quite different approach, but energy is still the most important. I can assure you that all the relations to our economy is about energy, as a matter of fact. Energy costs, electromobility, and so on, so on. So everything is around energy. And of course, our hydrogen gas package is of crucial importance in this case, also from the point of view security of supply, because somebody said not only sustainability, but also security of supply. So I am just trying to notice everything what you are saying. It is very important for me, but because we should introduce such a regulation and directive as well, which will be supportive, and we wouldn't like to change it in next years. Mm-hmm. It should be big stability of our regulation and our directives. Otherwise, we will disappear everything what is necessary to build in Europe.
And that is indeed a challenge, because we've been changing legislation a lot in the past years. But so let me stay on infrastructure more specifically now. Thank you, Jerzy Buzek. With a question to you, Maxim Peters. How do you see the development of hydrogen infrastructure taking place in the coming years when it comes to the localization of infrastructure, the scale of it, and the capacity? And also maybe a reflection about what Mr. Buzek actually mentioned, which is the repurposing of existing gas pipelines in this context.
Yeah, very good comment, by the way, on the stability of the policy framework, but also the workability of that framework should be key. On infrastructure level, what do we need? We need hydrogen backbones, as we all know. We really see positive plans being put to the table by the HNOs, as we call them, hydrogen network operators, or gas TSOs switching to becoming an HNO. The plans are quite concrete. For instance, the one in Belgium I mentioned, 2026 active in the Port of Antwerp-Bruges, then connected to the German and other neighboring countries market by 2028. That's a very concrete plan, but budget allocated. We really need it, and indeed we need to connect the producers and the consumers, or projects won't fly. But we don't only need, of course, the backbones, we also need facilities to import flows. Because next, complementary to local production of blue and green hydrogen, we'll also need imports. Europe is not able to supply their own needs, especially in Northwest Europe, heavily industrialized, not a lot of space, not a lot of wind and sun, so we'll need to import. It's actually a good thing because we need to diversify our supply. I think we all learned that being dependent on one or two sources is really not what we need in Europe. We need to diversify our supply. Therefore, we need terminals, import terminals. We need it for ammonia, methanol, LOHCs, e-kerosene, you name it, all of the different derivatives that we can use directly or convert back into hydrogen. We will not be dependent on one molecule. We see a lot of traction on ammonia, of course, which is a key molecule for the fertilizer industry, for the chemical industry to produce caprolactam and products as such, but we also can use it as a carrier. Next to that, we'll have methanol, an important building block in our chemical industry. We produce a lot of products from methanol, and it is a very high potential fuel for the maritime industry next to ammonia. We see a lot of those terminals. I use Port-Aventura Bruges as an example because I know it the best, of course. By 2024, so next year, we'll have the first ammonia cracker in operation by Air Liquide. It's really a leadership example to be a pioneer with such technology, to showcase the techno-economic feasibility of such technology. By 2026, we'll have an additional ammonia terminal by VTTI Group, combined with an ammonia cracker. By 2028, we'll have the Fluxys Vario terminal, also with an ammonia cracker in operation. So we see a lot of projects to expand that existing ammonia capacity, to expand that methanol and LOHC capacity. I just named some examples, but many are on the table. So really see that those projects moving forward because they really want to be ready when the supply comes. We see it from 2026 to 2028, the import volumes coming and then being cracked and put into the hydrogen backbone. But we see, of course, the policy framework is still a bit unclear on that level. So we sense a bit of nervousness in the market. For instance, in the gas package, the element on regulation of assets. We really see no need at all to regulate an ammonia terminal. We have ammonia terminals in operation today, the one of BASF, for instance, as an example. What do you do with old VS new terminals? What do you do on the volumes that are allocated to the ammonia market and to the cracked hydrogen market? We really see no need. There's enough commercial initiative. There's enough competition. I named some elements. Some terminals, enough competition on the ammonia terminal market, so there's no need to regulate that element at all, to our understanding. And a second element to which we're a bit concerned on the infrastructure level is the purity level of the hydrogen that will go into the backbone. A lot of discussions are going on, the 98%, 99.5%. In the end, it's just a discussion, is there sulfur or CO in the pipeline? Because a lot of the hydrogen, as mentioned, will go to the feedstock market, the chemical market. Highly sensitive catalysts, they cannot deal with sulfur and CO. So to our opinion, supported by a lot of companies, we'll need this high grade, this high purity hydrogen in the backbone, so the important off-takers can use it also in the fuel cells, and we need a polishing, purification at the producer side. Because electrolyzer, they produce clean hydrogen. Some technologies have some problems with impurities. Well, let's make sure they clean it before they put it into the pipeline.
So for that, you need a dedicated new network, not something that is repurposed from existing gas networks?
The two. Indeed, I forgot to mention that part of your question. Thanks for reminding me. We'll need the two. Again, we see in many countries the plans being drafted, and it's always a combination of old and new. Of course, we cannot repurpose the whole gas grid. We will still need gas for many, many years to come. We need to switch gradually. But in Belgium, we have some pipelines which will no longer be necessary. So they will be repurposed to hydrogen, which is perfectly feasible. We'll not dive into the technical details, but it's perfectly feasible, combined with some new built pipelines, which are dimensioned towards the longer-term potential of the hydrogen market.
Okay, we'll go back to repurposing with a question to you, Maria. But before we do that, let me turn to you, Klaus-Dieter Burkhardt, with a question about cross-border transport of hydrogen and this question of the infrastructure tariffs, which is one which is currently being discussed.
For me, of crucial importance.
Indeed. So is there a way to mutualize costs maybe from your users, or what are your views there?
Let me start. These are two different issues. The one is the cross-border tariffs, and then the mutualization. Let's separate this because they cannot be mixed. I'm very happy because Mr. Buzek still sees in me the director at the Commission, and I'm very happy to say, when I'm now explaining you the problem of the cross-border tariffs, that I had the same problem already with regard to the gas system, because back when I was still in duty, there was also already the thinking to remove the cross-border tariffs for natural gas. And I was at that moment already against that. And fortunately, it never saw the light of the day. It was a study, and the result of the study said we have to remove it. And now, in the Commission proposal, we see this now for the hydrogen network. And I haven't changed my mind. I think it's a very bad idea.
So why is that?
Yeah. So the problem behind, and that's, I have to explain that you see the full picture. The problem behind and why the Commission was and is still so keen to remove cross-border tariffs is the so-called pancaking issue. And because of the pancaking issue, the Commission believes that the cross-border transport tariffs hinder the trade. So tariff pancaking happens when hydrogen has to cross multiple market zones. And whenever it crosses one market zone, it is charged the tariff. That's the cross-border tariff. At each border, you have the tariff, interconnection point tariffs, if you like. And now the idea is to say, if for each market zone, when the flow goes through more than one market zone, you have one tariff layer after the other that comes on top of the transport cost. The transport cost gets so high so that the flows become even uneconomic, especially when the tariff for the needed capacity for the flows is higher than the price difference between two of these markets. So that's what is in the reasoning behind the removal of the cross-border tariffs. For me, it is absolutely not clear what the problem is here and what the Commission really wants to solve with removing these cross-border tariffs. Because let us take two possible scenarios. You have the scenarios that you have a lot of supply, and if you have a lot of supply, there is much less need in order to use cross-border transports. You are not exporting, you are just using it. And also, the price differential between two markets are below the transport cost. If you have scarcity in supply, the situation is different. The price differential between the markets rise, and the regulated transport cost above the regulated transport cost, because the demand for hydrogen is greater than the gross cross-border capacity, and that brings the prices up. But for me, this is exactly what the market should do. This is inherent of what we have seen as the market functioning. I have two other arguments where I don't see that the Commission in this case has taken into account two elements that cushion a bit the results of the pancaking effect. The first is what we have seen over years in the gas sector, and it will come in the hydrogen sector, is the possibility of swaps. You are not sending hydrogen from point A to B all the time, because you can also have different entry points and then you swap. So to reduce the distance of transport. And that, of course, is economically very interesting, because you have less transport distances to do. And then the second thing is, although you are very much supporting the big backbone right from the beginning, I see also the possible movement that, for instance, that the production will collocate with the consumption, what we already see in the ports. There, of course, this pancaking effect is absolutely absent. And the other is also that hydrogen users might also go closer to the production centers. Again, in that case, it is also no pancaking effect. But what matters maybe even more is not why the pancaking issue is, in my view, not a real issue. It is the removal of the cross-border tariffs will create new problems and even bigger problems than what the Commission envisaged through the pancaking effect. Network operators today receive allowed revenues, and these allowed revenues are consistent with a regulated rate of return on their regulated asset base. That's the principle. These revenues are recovered by the tariffs, and the tariffs are regulated and cost reflected. So cross-border tariffs simply reflects the cost of investment and the cost of moving hydrogen from one network to another. That's what it does. By removing the cross-border tariffs, network operators will still have to recover the same amount of revenue, but they will not be able anymore to recover it at the cross-border points. Now they have to calculate how to recover their revenues from the cross-border flows, from entry tariffs. These are where hydrogen is injected into the system, and exit tariffs, where hydrogen is taken out of the system. This requires, and this is now important, to do this calculation, this requires different networks with different regulators and different allowed revenues have to agree to share the costs of transporting the hydrogen across the networks. And this has to be done by an inter-TSO, transmission system operator, compensation mechanism. That has to be created. And that was, when I go back to my experience in the natural gas system, when we have put the idea of this inter-TSO compensation mechanisms for natural gas, it was an absolute no-go. Absolute no-go, because when you are doing this, you are redistributing money, which is not related directly to the investment that has been done on the course. So, maximum of complexity for member states and national regulatory authorities. And not only that this mechanism has to be negotiated once, every time you are adding a hydrogen infrastructure, this mechanism has to be recalculated, renegotiated in the light of the changing network overall between 27 parties. It's a nightmare. And if you imagine for a moment that these negotiations start once the rules are in force, it will take years, if not longer, if it comes anyway to an end, to negotiate such a mechanism. And therefore, we will lose a lot of time in order to start really repurposing and rebuilding the companies. I want to close with maybe three crucial points for you, Mr. Buzek, which one should keep in mind, and it's the quintessence of what I tried to explain. For me, this removal of cross-border tariffs, or the zero IP tariffs as they are called, confuses the grid users, because it creates the misleading impression that there are no costs. Oh, the Commission wants to remove the cross-border costs, so there are no costs. false. These are, in fact, non-visible costs. As I said, the revenues have to be collected through tariffs, and therefore, somewhere in the system, the fees have to be collected and have to be attributed to the operators. But for the users, these tariffs, which are now regulated, visible, and transparent, they are non-visible. There's no transparency and visibility for the users. The second is for the investors. If I would be an investor today, I would have my doubts, how much do I get as a return on my investment? Because with the system, that can change all the time, and I don't know really how the calculation is done, etc., etc. And lack of transparency, that might, in my view, also have a very negative impact on investors being ready to invest now in the necessary framework. And finally, just removing the cross-border tariffs would just kick the can down the road, as I said, because if you do that, you have in the other system, the flows within Europe will change, and it might even end up that the entry and exit tariffs that you then install will lead to much higher tariffs than the one that we have today with the cross-border tariffs. Is that therefore to be supported on the lifetime cross-border tariffs? In my view, no. But cross-border tariffs should fall in the context of merging markets. As we have seen, for instance, in the Baltics, between Denmark and Sweden, they have merged the markets. And when you are merging the markets, of course, the intra-cross-border tariffs go away, they fall. And that is a voluntary decision by the member states and the NRAs. And so the removal of the cross-border tariffs should remain voluntary and should be a decision that is taken in the context of the market merger, but it should not be imposed as it is now proposed by the Commission, at least, because of the negative impacts that I have tried to lay out today.
Okay, strong warning there by Klaus-Dieter Burkhardt. Yeah. We'll come back to that, I guess, a bit later on. But Maria Cecilia, maybe when it comes to repurposing of existing natural gas infrastructure, what are the economics behind this, and how can that be made also affordable from the consumer's perspective?
Thank you. May I react very quickly to what Professor Burkhardt just said? Security of supply is about investment. Now, if we want to invest in infrastructure, we need tariffs. So we fully share that zero IP tariffs will create uncertainty, and is not will make cross-border infrastructure less attractive. Coming to the point on repurposing, clearly. But I also want to react to what Maxim said on clusters versus pan-European cross-border infrastructures. We want to make this as efficient as possible, and we know now that the cheap resources for producing green hydrogen are far away from demand centers. So it is possible to have a cluster approach, but if we favor too much or derogations favoring too much cluster approach, we will miss that part, and we will make the whole value chain more expensive. Mm-hmm. And third, with this aim of bringing as much economic efficiency as possible, repurposing is a cost-competitive option. Of course, it is the cost of repurposing is about 30% of the cost of building a new pipeline. In the case of a 20 inches wide pipeline, it's around 20% cheaper for wider sizes. So it's clearly cost competitive. It's not always available because there are new supply regions, for example, in the Baltics, where there is very little gas infrastructure deployed currently, but where there is natural gas infrastructure in place.
It's always the cheaper option.
And this holds as well for imports. Of course, again, a very important point, we will need imports. Those countries that are well positioned with infrastructure already in place, is the case of Ukraine, with also vast renewable resources and full infrastructure in place, that can be a very good option. Then, of course, liquids will also be needed. We have already planned and current and planned capacity to import at least, according to our estimations, 4.5 million tons by 2030. So security of supply, in my view, is about investment. It's about investment and diversity. And yes, we need to make this, the regulatory framework right for that.
Yeah. Okay, let me turn to you, Jerzy Buzek, because we'll turn then to questions from the audience. A few reflections from everything we've heard. When it comes now to the trilogues, which are about to take place.
Thank you very much for all your remarks. I know very well that I have provoked you, as a matter of fact, to put a question on tariffs or cross-border tariffs, because it is very important issue from the point of European Parliament, because probably we had the heaviest discussion on that topic in the European Parliament. At the end, we decided by, let's say, majority that it should be like our proposal. So I am listening to you very carefully, knowing the position of member states, the council generally speaking, and I understand also our infrastructure, the big European infrastructure stakeholders. Antwerp Port is a big stakeholder, and would like to tackle the issue of costs. So thank you very much. Also, well, I will take it into account in our discussion in European Parliament. I would like to repeat your statement. I understand, Professor, dear Klaus Dieter, that cross-border transport tariffs, if I notice here, will not increase, as a matter of fact, generally speaking, of hydrogen transport, because they will simply spread those costs across the infrastructure. So it means, generally speaking, reflecting the cost of investment. So it's absolutely necessary to, by your opinion, but it will be not easy in European Parliament, I must tell you.
It's the cost of investment plus the cost of the transport, the real transport. Yeah. These are the two elements, and they are not going away.
Yeah.
And that's why it is a bad idea.
Well, very, very important, as you know, from point of view of a regulation which we prepared in European Parliament. So it's a heavy discussion from my point of view, and I try to translate all your remarks to our regulation or to our directive, because I feel responsible for that, and we wouldn't like to change it in 2 years or something, or 3 years, if it is not working properly. So we have done something with electricity market design, but we had, incredible COVID first of all, and then war. So in the case of war and Russia and all the problems, horrible problems with Russia, it was impossible to keep it longer, maybe, and to help European industry and also electricity sector to make it working, everything. But in the case of such a regulation, because my last remark in this place, that we should imagine the energy sector future in European Union will be two energy most important for energy electricity and hydrogen, two of them, maybe 70% electricity, 20% hydrogen. But we will have also some biomass, well-defined, should be well-defined, and biomethane. It means natural gas. From the chemical point of view, biomethane is the same as natural gas. So we should see the future energy sector with two energy carriers, which are not in nature. Hydrogen and electricity, they are not present in nature. We should produce them. I'm saying from renewables and maybe from nuclear, but I'm saying it's very, not very openly. But still, it's a quite new point of view for our energy sector. We should imagine that. So we are discussing about something like that. And to merge together electricity and gas and hydrogen, because we will have in the future 100 billion cubic meter of biomethane in the European Union. In 2030, we should have 35 billion. But they say we can have even 60, 70, but maybe more in the future. So as a biomethane will be also used in long future, like say 2050, 2060. So from that point of view, it's from one side very simple energy market, and on the other side quite different than today, completely different. Methanol and ammonia was mentioned. I'm not using the names methanol and ammonia because it's too complicated for public opinion, as a matter of fact. We should say hydrogen, green hydrogen, full stop. If we use it in air transport, ammonia is even better than the fuel for today, they say, and methanol in maritime is another issue. But everything is hydrogen, green hydrogen. Okay. Sorry to say that.
No.
Yeah.
So let me now turn to questions from the audience. Yeah. We had a few questions, I believe, already kind of answered, so I won't take them. It's about the stage development of the hydrogen market, which I think we've mostly addressed. There's one that we haven't addressed so far, which is coming from Nuclear Europe. And this is addressed, I think, to you, Maxime. So how do you see the integration of nuclear-powered hydrogen production facilities, such as small modular reactors, in hydrogen hubs like the port of Antwerp-Bruges?
Yeah, never debate without nuclear, right? Today we see that for the case in Belgium, let's talk about that case. That's the only one I know quite well on nuclear. The policy is quite clear, right? We're closing down capacity, we'll prolong other capacities, but there will be much needed for the electricity need in our country. So just for electricity alone, we will need that capacity. There is no real policy on new developments. There's an openness because Belgium has a lot of expertise in nuclear, so let's use that. But for now, there's no commitment on building new capacity. So it's hard to say something about new capacity when the policy framework is not working with us.
Yeah.
And to my humble opinion, we will need nuclear capacity for electricity needs first.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else wants to react? No?
Just confirm what Maxim said. I can not be
quite clear.
Yeah, quite speculative. SMRs, there's a lot of talk about it, but not many projects actually.
We differ from country to country in the European Union, but in general the approach is quite clear and we can agree with that.
And I would like to see the cost calculation, because even SMRs, they are less expensive than a fully fledged nuclear power plant, but they are still expensive. And they are in the, let's say, Kinderschuhs. They are not yet full developed, and so the prototypes will be even more expensive, etc. And then just using them to produce hydrogen will not be enough. The costs are much too high. So therefore, it has to be also directly electricity use. And then you are in the political debate, do we want nuclear in the electricity?
Yeah, of course, but we cannot stop nuclear power station so easily. So sometimes it's absolutely necessary to produce hydrogen.
Yeah, we should recognize it, that it is
no other
a possibility. Yes, we should not exclude it.
Well, the business case will decide.
Exactly.
So one question about the usage of hydrogen, and that's coming from somebody at Food and Water Action Europe. They're an NGO, to you, Mr. Buzik, in fact, about the uses of hydrogen. She's asking, there should be a debate about where to use it and where not to use it. So in places like heating, road transport, they're saying this would considerably help this chicken and egg problem, for example.
In long-term perspective, we cannot imagine decarbonization of Europe without using hydrogen in the case of, they say, even heavy transport, road transport, not only maritime or air transport. On the other hand, we should remember on local level, Professor Borchardt mentioned it, a local level of production and distribution is very important, and we should create something like communities in some territory of districts of few municipalities to create all the necessary demand and also supply of energy in this small territory. And from that point of view, we cannot imagine future without hydrogen and, of course, electricity storage. Today, the general approach to the issue, producing hydrogen from electricity using electrolyzers, and then producing from hydrogen electricity back is a general. We lose at least 65–70% of energy. So it is not very high percent like in old coal power stations. So in the future, we expect that it will be maybe 50% or maybe 40% we will lose in such a way. So we should remember that first of all, we should use electricity, if it is possible, everywhere. In some cases, like, because it was a question of using hydrogen, in the case of steel or fertilizers, chemical industry, is absolutely necessary to have hydrogen. There is no other possibility at all. And in the case of heavy transport, road transport, they say it could be even electricity, accumulating, and probably it is possible, but not in the case of maritime and air transport. So from that point of view, it's absolutely necessary to go to hydrogen.
Klaus-Dieter Burkhardt, maybe a reflection on this. I mean, the use cases for hydrogen, that has evolved quite considerably over the years. I mean, we were thinking of using hydrogen for heavy-duty vehicles, road transport. For light-duty vehicles, it's almost out of the question. And even for heavy-duty, it's now, electrification is becoming more and more competitive. I mean, are there now clear cases where hydrogen should not be used?
First of all, I agree with you that I remember when we started writing the hydrogen strategy for Europe. I was still in the Commission there, and we had plenty of use cases there. Plenty. All you have mentioned them. And over the years, one after the other got lost. So what remains for me is definitely what Maxime already said, the industries that have, or Mr. Buzik has said as well, has absolutely no other choice. And this choice will be used, or has to be used, obligatory very, very soon when, as I said, the combination of ETS and CBAM kicks in. because they have to prepare it by now. So there I see a huge demand coming up. And then, of course, there are still, I mentioned the refuel aviation or even on member states, the 42% or 65% of usage of renewable hydrogen in the industry. These are elements that will contribute to it. But if I still may do the link to the infrastructure, what is important, I think Mr. Buzek said that at the beginning, but I would like to repeat that. For me, whatever usage you take, what is absolutely vital, because you have not only hydrogen, you have electricity, you have district heating, by the way, and you have still natural gas, that you need to do a common planning. That is also still something, Mr. Buzek, that is still open in the discussion, because I think the Parliament is for an integrated planning at national and at EU level. Council and Commission seems to be another view, and I don't understand that, especially at the European level. How in the hell will you give the right answers for the off-taking demand and the supply if you are not having a holistic view on the infrastructure needed, and not only for hydrogen, but for all the other networks as well? Only then you get the full picture, and then you can also take maybe the decisions which carrier is the most lucrative, the best business case for me. But if you have to look at through different plans in order to make your own picture how it looks for your business, that's not going to work. So I think the demand question here, you can see, is also intrinsically linked to a common and integrated planning.
Yeah.
Maria Cecilia, maybe a reflection on integrated planning?
Exactly, because definitely it's not just that hydrogen and natural gas to plan jointly is needed in order to do the repurposing or the phase out of the existing grids. Is that, as you mentioned, Mr. Buzek, the future of the energy sector in Europe will be 70% base electricity, and from electricity we will produce the hydrogen. So it's impossible to do this efficiently.
Green electricity, of course.
Definitely, and hydrogen can play a crucial role, critical role in stabilizing the network, allowing for higher shares of renewables, avoiding curtailments. This is very key.
Yeah, the excess electricity that is now curtailed, this is a waste of money. It's billions that are spent there.
Yeah.
The more integrated planning, I guess that would require probably some of the member states, or actually all of them, giving up some of their regulatory competences to some kind of European level, which is always difficult politically.
But they have to jump over that fence. I could imagine that for certain well-justified reasons, they keep doing it at the national level separately or not fully integrated. But at the European level, there is absolutely no alternative, because you cannot get the full system working if you are not having a common planning. It's not, for me, it's not thinkable.
Maxim
We will
Peters,
have as well CO2.
So from that point of view, integration of three energy systems, electricity, maybe as the most important, hydrogen as gas, is necessary, because we will still have some gas in the future. I mean biomethane, because it is produced from green wastes, so it's renewable gas. So from that point of view, we would like to use it also in future, and in 2050, 2030, and maybe 7 to 8 billion cubic meter will be possible in the European Union.
That's a very good example, because if your figures are right with the biomethane up to 100 BCM, then of course, because biomethane can be used via or transported via the existing gas network.
Yeah.
So therefore, this is important.
Fertilizers production, for example.
Discussion, because you cannot. You should then also take into account which pipelines should stay for gases, for natural gases or green gases, in that sense for bio?
Fertilizers production, we should use probably in the future biomethane.
Why
So
not?
it is possible, absolutely. On the other hand, we should also remember that electricity is the first. Like we say that, in the past, renewables and energy saving. Energy saving was the first. Now electricity is the first. Even being responsible for hydrogen, I'm saying electricity the first. Because it's quite obvious.
Maxime Peters, and then we'll have a round of closing statements, but very quickly on the need for more integrated planning on a European level. I mean, does that make sense to you?
Maybe on the biomethane, let's also not forget synthetic methane, which we can produce from renewables and green hydrogen. Could be a potential solution. On the infrastructure, I'll come back to my previous point. I think on the backbones, for sure, we need a hydrogen backbone that's quite clear to connect all the different clusters, production and demand, quite clear. As we did with the natural gas network, I think we can see a nice comparison. But on the terminals, no. I think there's so much commercial initiative, and we're going to kill that commercial initiative if we put too much planning into place. We see enough initiative to assure the fact that we'll have a stable supply. Let's let the market play within a clear framework, of course, a level playing field. That's quite important. But let's not over-regulate, because that will kill market initiative, and we really feel it. That could happen.
Okay.
Maybe one word, because that irritates me, I must say, because for me, the planning is not that the politicians tell you where the terminal has to go. The planning is that if you, as a business, have decided terminals go here and there, that these decisions are taken up in the overall planning and to coordinate that with the planning of other networks. Which is, you might say it's not necessary because there you are working in a smaller cluster. But for me, to take up the locations and also the connections from the terminals then to the consumption centers is something that needs to go into the planning.
Okay, but then I agree. If the market players can take their initiative,
yes,
and then it's taking up in the overall planning.
It's not
I agree.
planning.
It needs to be bottom up, essentially, is what you're saying.
And I agree.
We need to wrap soon, so let me turn to you, Mr. Buzik, first for some thoughts after everything that you've heard today during this conference. Now you're going to the trilogues. Are there any, essential points that you would like to make?
Everything what we were talking about is a central point of our regulation and directive. So I am listening very carefully to everything, all your questions from the audience, very important. And from my perspective, it is rather necessary to listen today, and I hope I haven't had any new idea during our discussion, because I would like to listen to you, their panelists. And I can say quite generally, what is very important, regulatory framework for hydrogen, gas, hydrogen, very, very important. Energy sectors integration is maybe the most important issue, and to avoid market fragmentation via derogations. It was mentioned by somebody in the discussion. Derogations could be, from that point of view, very dangerous from point of view of fragmentation. And at the end, of course, security of supply, because without security of supply, we would like to have any prosperity in the EU, and everything which is net zero industry act is about, as a matter of fact, security of our economy. Generally speaking, it is grounded on electricity and hydrogen sector. Energy sector is absolutely fundamental. For 4 years, we have done everything in the EU what was necessary to do to prepare ourselves to 2030, 2050 demand. And now let us think on competitiveness of our economy in the big scale also geopolitics in this big scale. CBAM was mentioned, and so on, so on. So now we are saying the same, but in different way, from the point of view of economy, generally speaking, and also our social acceptance to everything what we are doing today. Because at the end, in 2050, we would like to have a full support of our public opinion. In 27 years is our expectation.
Maxime Peters, so closing statement from your end. If you had maybe just one recommendation to make to Mr. Buzek and the other policymakers as they enter the trilogue, what would that be?
Antwerp should better play football. Yesterday.
They're not too bad.
I will
They are
I will
playing in the
support
European
your.
League now.
Yeah. They grew substantially, but I'm not a football fan, so I could care less. No, first of all, I'm proud to be European. I think Europe is doing a great job at being a pioneer, at being so audacious to putting the targets there, to move forwards, to set an example to the rest of the world. Quite proud of that. I think it's one of the most important words that I heard in this debate is from Mr. Buzek, is prosperity. I'm truly afraid that we will lose it. We need to make sure that we combine climate neutrality with prosperity, that we let technologies grow, that we keep industry here and growing, that we create a market, which is such a great mechanism in Europe. So let's try to keep those two elements in mind and combine them, climate neutrality, but let's not forget prosperity, make workable targets, give support to the industries, so we can keep playing this pioneer role, 2030, 2040 and beyond.
Okay, Klaus-Dieter Burkhardt, one recommendation to policymakers, would it be about the cross-border infrastructure tariffs or something else?
I think I have said what I think about that. No, I have another message, very brief. Don't overcomplicate things right now. Look at what is needed in order to let businesses breathe and to develop and to get their investments on the ground and support this. So at this stage, don't develop structures or rules which creates unnecessary costs, burdens, and regulation. I compare that now today with what we have done so far for a well-functioning integrated gas market. We did not do that in one go. We needed 3 packages, gas packages, in order to get where we are today with the gas market. And to believe that in hydrogen we could do that in one shot is not reasonable. And therefore, I leave it by saying perfection is the enemy of the good. So don't try to be perfect, just be good in the sense to achieve as far as we can the targets and to help businesses to make their business cases work.
Maria Cecilia, maybe one final recommendation?
I would like to highlight the existing momentum. There are concrete projects. Now operators are investing and hopefully will show that the technical barriers can be overcome. We need, of course, to de-risk those projects in order to take FIDs. Some sort of, during the ramp-up, some sort of support either to end users or to operators in the form of state guarantees can be really helpful for this aim. But more importantly, what we need is a regulatory framework that removes the barriers.
And which is future-proof as well. Right, I think this takes us to the end of this conference. Big thanks again to ENSOG for supporting it. Big thanks to our panelists, of course, for being with us today, and to our audience here in the room and also online. If you missed the beginning of this conference, you can watch it again on YouTube and other social media platforms. And if you're interested to know more about Euractiv events, please go to our website, events.euractiv.com. I think that's all for me. So looking forward to speak to you another time. Bye-bye.